me, is this the reading room?
Yes, I'm Saad Manzoor.
And I'm Travis Howard.
This is Reading Room Talk. Thanks for pressing play. Welcome.
Yes, thanks everybody.
Welcome, guys. It's been a long time. We shouldn't have left you. Got Dr. Asante Dickson to step to. What's up, man? How's it going? How are you?
I am very well, thank you, gentlemen. It's good to be back.
He's back.
Oh yes. And we're talking about some important stuff today. It's about the time of the year. It's like November, December. People feel like people in fellowship. People finishing up residency, their training. They're talking about what should we do? So, what type of practice should I sign on to? What should I do? So, let me ask you, Dr. Dickson, what was your process like when you were finishing up training and trying to make a decision on, what to do? Private practice versus academics versus hybrid versus doing nothing. What'd you do?
My situation might have been a little unique in that, as is the case for everybody, where you are in your life and what is life doing to you at the time often plays a role in what decisions you make. And
it's not in a vacuum. That's right.
I am from New York. My parents were in North Shore, Long Island at the time, and I was doing my fellowship at Stanford. So, Palo Alto and New York are like Jupiter distance apart. Not just by, by East Coast standards, anything west of Pennsylvania is like West Coast. And so the 3 hour time difference, the challenge in getting back and forth, and just the complete separation of life and culture between East Coast and West Coast challenged me throughout my fellowship because my dad was home sick the whole time.
Oh, wow.
So I basically spent 2 years of fellowship. I mean, I own JetBlue. So whenever I was not on call, and you're a fellow, and there were four of us, so we took call once for a whole week for basically Q4 for a week. So whenever I could, I would take a red eye back to New York Friday night, and then fly back Sunday afternoon. So that was my experience, my entire fellowship. So
that's crazy. Yeah, it's like you're not even like super present, like in the fellowship. You're like worried about
fellowship was a blur for me. And there's one of those things where I look back, and many people listening may be able to relate. When you're going through really hard times at home, sometimes you look back and you say, I don't even know how I did that.
Yeah, talk about that.
I don't even know how did I even do it, but you did it. And so then right before I graduated fellowship, my dad passed. And, literally like he passed in April, and then, we graduate at the end of June. So he missed the end of my medical training.
That's rough.
By 2 months, right? Never got to see me finish. And so therefore, this comes to answering your question, coming out of Stanford, a lot of fellows, they kind of have a hookup with a lot of local private practices and academic centers because Stanford every year, they kind of hook you up. So for me, I wasn't able to take advantage of that because number one, I was always focused with, I need to finish this fellowship, number one. And number two, I had trouble kind of accepting that I'm an only child, so that I would leave my mom back in New York alone, and I'm up in some highfalutin private practice in Sausalito.
Right.
And it just didn't make sense for me.
Yeah.
So, given the rush of time, as it appeared like a rush, between my dad passing in April, graduation in June, um, I just went with what was in front of me, and that was my old residency back in Long Island. I did my residency at Winthrop Hospital, which at the time was a Stony Brook teaching hospital. Today it's NYU. NYU bought it, so now it's part of the NYU system. And those of you in New York know that, right now, Northwell and NYU are buying up everything and anybody.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So I naturally took the path of least resistance, and because I didn't really have time to be doing this interviewing, my life was shambles. It was in shambles. So I didn't have time to be doing all this interviewing and stuff. I just took what was easy to do, which is to go back where I trained, because they were like, "Yo, we need help. Come back."
Yeah.
It's familiar. It's not a new thing, and you're going back home. Yeah,
and I'm going back home.
Really.
Yeah, to be close to your mom.
And to be closer to my mom. So close, in fact, that I literally moved into the house and I lived in the basement.
Wow.
So when I came back as my first 2 years as an attending, I was living in the house in the basement with my mom. And we were both kind of just trying to survive the loss of my dad. And I was simultaneously, starting my career as an attending. So long-winded answer, but the answer for me was not so much, choice and evaluation. It was more life circumstances put me in the academic center without me even really thinking much about it.
Yeah, and that's important to realize too. I mean, because like you'll like look through these charts and look through these articles, and they'll be like, oh well, this is the advantages, these are disadvantages. But like again, these decisions aren't made in a vacuum, especially like in our community. Like there's a lot of decisions that are like a lot of things that come with the decision that like are just not on these like charts, So that's awesome that you're able to like be brave enough to be like, I'm just gonna do this. Like this is the right thing to do, and I see all the other fellows like signing on to like stay out in Cali, but I'm gonna do the right thing. So that's awesome that you're able to make that decision for yourself and for your family, obviously.
Yeah, which I gotta say too, it's very seldom taken into account what we do and how it affects community, how it affects the people around you, and that's something that is thrown around in our culture. If you get good home training, you'll have community, you'll have those things in mind. So while it's a burden to bear, more, I don't really consider it that way, but some people might. But you should consider community and your family when you're making these decisions.
Yeah, you should. I think because the next thing people will talk about, they'll talk about the money, right? Like it's going to be about the money, like where you are and like how much money you're making. And I mean, there's a discrepancy. There definitely is, like between certain practices and academics. And again, it's not black and white, because there is like a hybrid situation, and not every academic program is like strictly academic. Like a lot of them are like kind of switching to like an IVU RVU based system, and sometimes it's like split between your IVUs RVUs versus like your base salary. And there's a lot to take into account. So tell us, how's it set up over at Stony Brook, where you were at when you started?
It was typical academic setup. Everybody was divided into sections. So body had their own thing, neuro had their own thing, breast had their own thing. Of course, IR was split between neuro IR and body IR. We had the prolific Dr. Douglas Katz, who is a body radiologist, and he was like the research machine. Dr. Katz, Dr. Katz, for those of you who've been to RSNA, when you're walking around RSNA and you see the radiologists with the tags on them because they're like speakers. And
Yeah.
I remember one time running into Dr. Katz at RSNA. And everybody would usually, when they were a speaker, they have maybe like one tag saying they were a speaker. This dude had tags. It was like touching his belt. Like the number of tags. It reminds me of, like, in the military, like dudes have 1 star, 2 stars. This dude had stars like going down the side of his sleeve. Like there wasn't enough shirt to keep the number of tags on Katz's on label. Like he's one of those guys. Like that dude pumps out papers like water,
Right.
and he is. He's like a walking pathologist. Like when you talk about a radiologist making the pathological decision based on the imaging and
Mm.
being right a lot of times, that was Doug Katz. And of course, I always had nicknames for people. So his name was Doug Katz. So I would call him uh, DKLI, instead of DKNY. I'd call him DKLI, Doug Katz, Long Island, because he was like his own brand, man. The dude was just.
That's awesome.
So, different sections and the research. And of
Hmm.
course, as a result, I'm sure you guys will get into it. Then you have the academic infighting that comes with all
Mm.
of that division of service and division of labor and,
Yeah,
silos and, basically making tribes within the department.
yeah, yeah. That's it's interesting because it's like the department itself will have like the infighting, but then outside of the department they look at us as one. They're like, this is the radiology department, but then like
Exactly.
inside you're like, this is neuro, this is body, this is like, don't send this to me, send this to someone else. And
Right.
yeah, it's funny. It's funny, and that's a big difference between between academics and I think private practice is the whole thing in private practice. A lot of them, like, they'll have you kind of do everything, and that's the whole point of it's good because it kind of makes the schedule a little bit more flexible. It kind of helps keep all you train for everything. So it is nice to like be able to do everything when you finish and not kind of get pigeonholed. Like when you're just doing one type of like medicine and radiology. So I think did you feel like you were kind of like losing any skills at all, like when you were like only in like one part of the department, or what were your thoughts there?
I didn't, because I was one of those people that I got a feeling very early that doing one specialty was a mistake. So I was neuro trained, but I still made sure that I took body call and still made sure that I did my Saturday and Sunday readouts, to read the residents out in the morning and, do the 8 to 5 daytime shift,
Yeah.
because I was scared from the very beginning to be like some of the attendings I saw at Stanford that were just so very subspecialized that like I there were some neuro attendings that if a chest X-ray needed to be reviewed in collaboration with the brain MRI, they would be like, "Hey, we need somebody to take a look at this." And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm not doodling on them for that. I'm just saying, for me, I didn't really see myself as being somebody that would be so highly specialized in an academic setting that I could not interpret the other images without somebody else assisting me. So
Mhm.
from the very beginning, I mean, I'm kind of all over the place, right? So I'm neuro trained, but I do body IR, and I do full body reading.
Mhm.
But I do breast. Um,
Oh
and I
man, that's it all.
and I learned this along the way because I was always concerned that if I didn't know these things, I would have to work in an academic place where there were sections.
Mm.
But the last thing I want to tell people who are listening is, remember, you can't do neuro, body, chest, MSK, nuclear medicine, you know, and do IR and be good, right? You can't be
Yeah.
good at everything. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm,
So I have to say, do I consider myself a good radiologist? Yes. But I got weaknesses like all hell. Like I tell you, my weakness is MSK. Right. So if you give me anything other than a hip or a knee, and even in that hip and knee, if you're not asking for something basic like, is it is it like infected or not?
I feel you, man. It
yeah, man.
is no. If you don't do it every day, it's a beat.
It's a lot
Is it
of
broken
yeah,
or not?
it's a lot of microanatomy for sure, man.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's true. Travis, so wait, so you kind of have a different perspective because you're like a real doctor. So tell us, like, what was your process going through, trying to figure out what to do, finishing up fellowship in Boston?
Well, I know Asante kind of alluded to it. I wanted to be subspecialized, and I wanted to do what I was trained to do during my fellowship, and didn't really want to do anything else. And I think I
Mm,
kind of knew that early on, going into radiology. The direct to IR match
hmm.
was it didn't exist at the time, but I always knew I wanted to do procedures.
You would have if it did.
Oh yeah, I would have if it existed, but I would have tried. But
Yeah.
so I was looking for 100% IR jobs,
Mhm.
and luckily I was able to. Not very many, and
Yeah.
so when I found one in an area that I wanted to be in, it just kind of all aligned with family in town and not being too far away from where my folks live. It
Hmm.
just it just seemed like a great fit, and I had lived, several places and really, thought ahead where I wanted to raise my children, my future children that weren't even born yet.
Hmm. I love it. Well, you were in Minnesota for a while, so yeah.
Minnesota and Boston, and taking all things, obviously my wife and what she wanted to do as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think when it comes to career, you just have to prioritize what's most important to you. And
Hmm.
for me, work-life balance and being able to be there with my family and 100% IR and location.
Yeah.
Those things were very important to me. So yeah,
So when
me.
you say work-life balance, like, what do you mean specifically, like work-life balance?
Oh, because as we'll get into, and Asante can speak to it more than me probably, because this I've only had one job after training. But in some private practice settings, I mean, you can make a ton of cash, but you're going to be working longer hours,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
you can get a bunch of vacation. But when you're working, you're going to be working. You're going to be working hard. So being able to get home and take your kid to kung fu, or being able to get home and take your daughter to dance, that you might not be able to. You may be able to, but you might not be able to do that. And go over homework and all those sorts of things. Like I just
Yeah,
I wanted to be a very present father for my children, and so I don't know. I knew that was very important to me off the rip. And I miss my son was well, my son was 2 at the time, and my daughter was born as soon, the first day I started my
yeah.
daughter was born. So it was like,
Uh,
I had them in mind. So
yeah. No,
yeah,
that's a good point, man. You made the whole thing about vacation. I think that's a big thing too, because you'll be looking at like these jobs, and it'll say like 18 weeks vacation, but then like your day to day though to get the 18 weeks could be pretty rough. You could be working like 12 hours a day. You could like be just cranking the whole time. So I think like I started a private practice when I first finished, and I just think like having flexibility throughout the day and just being like knowing that you can be done at like a decent time to like have time with your family every day. I think to me that's actually more important than like having the multiple weeks of vacation, because if you start like calculating hours of vacation, like how much time you have off away
mhm.
from work, I think it's important to like just know that like for me it's like important to be done by like 5 so I can like do my other things. I don't want to work till like 7, and then like on like the days that like, I have like whatever, like 12 weeks vacation, it's like no one else has vacation. You're just like by yourself, you're chilling. like,
Yeah,
like no
yeah,
one else is doing this. So
yeah.
I mean, to me, it was kind of important to like just know that the day to day is like is good, and like I can like have a little bit of flexibility throughout the day and get things done, because like that's the majority of your life. Like during the day is gonna be like working, so you want to make sure that like that day to day is like it's not a grind. You're not getting like murdered every day. You're not like super tired. We can't do anything when you're done. So like I think that's actually more important to me than like the actual number of like off vacation weeks. So and even like weekends too. Like I think when I first finished, the job I was at, like when you were on for a weekend, you would be on for like 12 hours for 2 days. So like that weekend's done. Like you can't do anything that weekend. But like at other practices, like your weekend quote unquote shift could be like just 8 hours, and that's your weekend. But you still have the rest of the weekend to kick it. So it's like it's important to look into these like little details. I feel like whenever
Right.
you are looking into these jobs, So
Yeah.
man, it's tough. And then like and the money part too. I think that again that is important. I feel like depending on the community, depending where you're coming from, depending on your loan situation, debt situation, I mean, it's major, to like, be able to make a decision, based on like where you live, one, because that's going to kind of affect, your cost of living, state income tax, not state income tax, like, stuff like that. And, I mean, the difference in money can be significant. It
Sure.
really can,
And some people, if you're a physician and you might have a whole bunch of people on your back
Oh, yeah,
from your family. And if you need to go out
exactly.
and make a bunch of money so you can support some people for a short amount of time, that's a real deal. I'm sure all of us have friends and that have graduated and had that motive, that goal.
Exactly. So tell us, Asante, you didn't stay Stony Brook forever. So what kind of motivated you to make your next move?
What motivated me to make the next move would be what usually motivates men throughout our lives is that I met a woman,
Oh,
and we basically, she was in DC and I was in New York. I lived in after the first 2 years I moved from my mom's basement into my own apartment finally.
When you met her, were you living in your mom's apartment in your mom's basement?
I absolutely was.
Oh man, that's love. That's love.
how
I
did you make it there?
absolutely was chilling in the basement, and um then I moved to Harlem and got my own spot on 120th and 5th,
Mm,
and right over Marcus Garvey Park, and was chilling and having my little, my little 2 bedroom, 2 bath. Um,
that's a mansion in New York, in Harlem. Come on, man.
it is, and that was I don't know if it still is, but that building was one of the tallest residential buildings in Harlem at the time. I don't know if that is still the case. It was brand new, and there's a
That's very cool.
pool and a gym, and pool and gym in Harlem is not normal.
That's a mansion.
Yeah, not in my apartment. I'm saying in the building there was a
Uh-huh.
pool and a gym. Um, and then we kind of went back and forth between DC and New York, and then finally, she gave the old, like, yo, you're not gonna be eating up my years of just going back and forth. What is
Mm,
your plan?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
of course, as most men, we were kind of like, I was kind of like, what's my plan? That's a
Did
good
you get
question.
that?
I've never really thought about that. My plan.
what you mean? What you mean?
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Um, so then I started looking for jobs in DC because she is an OBGYN. I'm a radiologist, and
Mm,
as you know, OBGYN is a miserable specialty when it comes to quality of life.
Uh-huh.
mm.
And then for you to leave DC to come to New York as a new OBGYN, you just asking for licks. Right? You're gonna get a pay cut off the bat.
Yeah.
And then you'll be taking all the holidays. New York medicine is brutal, and they'll tell you, yeah, well, you got to take all the holidays. And so I just figured, it would probably be easier for me to move as a radiologist than it would be for her to move up here as an OBGYN.
Mm.
So I started looking down in the DC area. And believe it or not, one of the jobs that I interviewed at first was Kaiser Permanente.
Oh.
Mm.
Um, Interviewed at Kaiser Permanente down in the Maryland, DC area. And they were very nice. And the guy so when I was a fellow at Stanford, this is how the world is kind of small. When I was
Mhm.
a fellow at Stanford, some of the fellows used to moonlight at Kaiser in Cali, up in Northern California.
Okay.
Yep.
And the dude who used to run the moonlighting hookup in Cali, um, turned out he moved from Cali to the DC area. And so by the time I applied, he was like the head of the radiology dude in DC.
Funny.
So when I saw his name, I was like, "Oh my God, this is this the same guy who used to run radiology up in Cali?" And sure enough, it was him. So now he had moved to DC. So because I knew he was in charge, and I kind of quote unquote knew him back in Cali, I was
Hmm.
like, "Oh, let me consider Kaiser." But I just made the decision that I would go with another opportunity that actually came to me.
Mm.
Let me tell you this for those listening. I'm rambling, but I have a point, right? Um, so I'm in New York because I'm just interviewing and looking around. I'm in the doctor's lot. I'm taking a break. I'm standing in the doctor's lot. It was hot outside, and I get a call, and I didn't recognize the number. I picked up the number, so I deepened my voice. Hello,
Okay.
because not sure where this is coming, where this is going, who this. And it was a woman, and she said, "Dr. Dickson?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, my name is XYZ. Um, we heard about you, and there's an opportunity down in the DC area that we'd like you to consider." And I said, "Who is this?" And I couldn't figure out, like, well, I was like, how'd you get my number? Who told you to call me? And she was like, "We need somebody who does body IR, neuro, and breast." And
Mm.
we were told that you do those.
There's only one person.
Mm.
So long story short, I went down, interviewed, and it was at a community center down in Montgomery County, Maryland, called Adventist Healthcare.
Mm.
And I had not really heard of that particular. I know Adventist is worldwide, but I'd never really heard of this particular system. But what attracted me to it was the fact that, once again, it allowed me to do all three of the things that I did. Because I
Mm.
remember I told you when came out as an attending, my fear was always, if you do one thing, it kind of limits you.
Yeah.
And I'm not, again, I say to all of you academic people that only do your subspecialty and you do it damn well, hey, kudos. I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying, for me,
That out. Yes.
um, being able to roll between things was more attractive to me.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up down in the Maryland area. And that's how I ended up starting into the community and private practice model.
Mm.
That was my entrance into the private practice model.
Please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you get your pods.
I mean, basically, if you talk about private practice versus academics from a money perspective, then this podcast episode is going to be about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I heard that.